For organizations to change, people need to change. But how do you do this? My guest today is passionate about coaching. She believes that facing and exploring uncertainty and difference is essential to being, learning, and leading in our age. But nobody should have to do this alone. Effective coaching is key to finding certainty in the ever-quickening cycle of change. Today, we'll discuss how coaching can support people to explore their edges, to learn what is required to get them to their goals, and to see if AI could ever step into this role. So, Sarah, welcome to In Good Company. It's a delight to have you here. How are you today?
I'm really good. It's really good to be here. Thank you for asking me along.
Well, yeah, no, we're delighted to have you here, and we should straight away start with introductions. So we're going to ask you the same question that we ask all of our guests on this podcast, which is to tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
I've been thinking about this. This is the question that's actually I'm most nervous about answering,
Yeah.
mostly because I usually say to people, look at LinkedIn, or have a look at my profile. The key thing, though, is I've come down to two words. I'm relentlessly curious.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to describe me, I am quite curious about what's happening, what's behind, and then there's the other bits and pieces. I live in Oxford in the UK, and I sound like I shouldn't be here. Grew up in the United States, in a place called Detroit. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've been in the UK and working globally for the last 30 years. Um, and and I realized recently that in my coaching practice, I'm approaching 7,000 hours or so,
Right.
which in our sphere, sometimes we talk about being masterful. Finally, I love to get things wrong. And by
Good.
that, I mean, when you're talking about being on our edge, that's what that means. So when you get stuff wrong, what do you do next? And that's where the fun bit begins.
Yeah.
So that's a
Awesome.
bit.
Well, yeah. Well, well. First of all, you were within the 60 seconds. I'm fairly certain. So well done. Relentlessly curious. What a great way of describing yourself. I can relate to that because I do ask a lot of questions. Probably a good reason to be in this job, I guess.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, loving to get things wrong. I think it's a good place to be in when we can accept. I heard a wonderful quote the other day, which I'd never heard before, surprisingly, because you'd have thought you would do, which is,
Mm.
and I believe it was Einstein. I probably should have paid more attention to who said it, but it was failure is success in progress, which I thought was a really nice way of articulating that. So yeah, I'm going to sort of live by that. I should probably figure out definitely who said it, but I'm fairly certain it was Einstein. I'm going to go with that for
Yeah,
now
I
anyway.
think that's right. And then there's another one that's about fail again, fail better. And
Yeah.
and that's that's I think that's Beckett, but it's a similar kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
about
Nice.
being okay with trying things and understanding that when we try things, we will probably get it wrong first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Well, I could divert and go off on a tangent, but I'm not going to. I'm going to stay focused,
Okay.
and I'm going to. And first of all, we also need to talk about the fact that you have been working for. So you brought up our LinkedIn, and of course, coaching
Mm,
is in your blood, it seems. But you've been working for Impact for the past nearly 3 years now
yeah.
as a coach. But if you look back on your LinkedIn that you mentioned. Coach is pretty much in almost every job description and job title you've had. So passionate about coaching is probably an understatement.
Mm.
Um, but so we're glad to have you on to talk about coaching, first of all. And so where did this passion come from? Why are you so passionate about coaching?
So this is where we go beyond the 60 seconds. Uh,
Sure.
my
That's allowed.
I grew up in a place where I was faced with difference a lot, and I was um, always curious about how people behaved and what was behind. And so if you look at I went into conflict resolution. So I was a mediator and trained mediators at the community level here in the UK for a while. And through that, then you understand really quickly how that one-to-one or even the group coaching conversation, what worked well, what do you need to have more of, and helping people explore their practice was really useful. Yes, it's in my blood, but funnily enough, I feel fortunate because the coaching profession is a young one, and I happen to be there kind of
Mm.
at the beginning. There are a few people who have been around a little bit longer than I have, but yeah, so that's where it's come from. It comes from curiosity about how people behave with each other and how we can better use the skills that we have and the strengths that we have to lead and support and move people through change, for instance.
Mhm.
So that's a bit of the where it comes from a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's you're certainly well experienced in coaching. That has to be said. Certainly, just as you say, as we said, looking at your LinkedIn. So, looking over your career, then, how does the perhaps impact approach differ to conventional coaching or coaching that you've certainly experienced throughout your career? How does it differ?
One of the reasons Impact and I work together so well, and
Hmm.
what drew me to coming to Impact, because I had been working in the field for a little while, was how we talk about noticing and decision.
Hmm.
So, and in particular, that sweet spot between what do we notice, what do we notice, and then what do we decide to do about it, and that
Yeah.
actually is the core bit of coaching, being internally aware and being aware of how I'm feeling, what I'm bringing to this conversation, building external awareness. So, what else am I seeing, and then when I'm coaching someone, encouraging them to do the same and so that they can make better decisions around when facing huge levels of uncertainty and think about who else do they need to bring into their conversation. So I'm in my mind, I have an executive that I'm thinking of at the moment. What are they noticing about their mood? What are they noticing about their team? And before making a decision, really looking at the context. What else am I missing? And
Mm.
often one of the things executives miss is their whole selves. And by that I mean, and you'll see me even now, movement. So right now, as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking about what's going on with my feet. What do I feel in my gut?
Right.
And I believe that what happens with us currently is we're still very much caught in our minds and our heads, and we don't use all the data that the rest of our body is giving us. So that's the exciting bit about being in the field right now, is because how impact creates experiences and helps people to unpack how they've had that experience is very much in line with effective coaching. And there's
Hmm.
lots of research around how our nerves give us information about decision making that we're not accessing because we're just not using our whole selves.
Yeah, that's and that's a good point you've raised there. And just for the benefit of those people that maybe aren't so familiar with Impact's work, the you were referring a lot to the leadership model on leadership that we've got, which if you've not seen, this is going to be a shameless plug for previous episodes, but go back and look at episode 1, which was all about the leadership model with one of the people who sort of created it for Impact.
Yeah, and our
Yeah,
default
no,
is we immediately go from noticing to acting without taking
yeah.
a moment to look at context, and that's what
Mm.
coaching can do. And it's
But it
where
was
and that's
really
where the decisions are made.
And it was really interesting to hear you talk about it with not just looking at sort of situation
Mm,
that we're maybe looking at noticing and but also the body, like going properly down to granular detail about what's noticing, what's going on for you, both mentally but also physically as well. You know, I think
mm.
that's and even I mean, I've worked here for 10 years and never really considered it like that before. So that's a really valuable insight. So, in terms of looking at how coaching can facilitate the transition from
Mm.
traditional leadership to perhaps a more human-centered approach, do you think that that's what coaching can do in today's rapidly evolving business landscape?
Well, certainly the World Economic Forum and lots of other research is showing that key skill of leader is actually much more around coaching and facilitation. And then what that
Mhm.
requires is for us to be focusing on the person in front of us. So
Sure.
absolutely, what coaching can do in an executive coaching relationship, as well as because at Impact, we also do what we call programmatic coaching. So the coaching that we do along with our leaders as part of another leadership journey. In both of those instances, you have a chance to build the capacity in the person that you're coaching to pay attention to the people around them. I
Hmm.
can't coach without a human in front of me.
Yeah, I mean that makes total sense, doesn't it? I mean, it's I suppose what that will come back to is, and we've got another question a bit later
Yeah,
on about
yeah.
how technology might get involved, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So I suppose what would be good to pick apart now then is in your experience, and I suppose more recent experience we're looking into, is because you're a qualified coach, you work with people all over the world. What are currently the most common themes that you're noticing in your practice? What are people needing help with?
Well, I was really struck by when we opened, when we were talking about uncertainty. One thing for certain that a coaching conversation can have is provide space for executives and leaders to pause
Hmm.
and really look at what is happening. And so that's one of the key things that I'm noticing a great deal of is, one, we don't have time to pause because change is so rapid and in
Mm.
all aspects of our lives, both personal and professional, that we're not taking time to pause. So that's one thing that I'm really noticing, that executives and leaders are still going nonstop, and coaching provides some space to think. And that leads into, again, the uncertainty piece leads into, there's a real concern for, and my colleagues and I, other coaches here at Impact, I was chatting with one the other day, we're noticing that there's the edginess of a little bit of burnout, which
Mm.
is related to what I was just talking about. We're trying to do more with less. We're dealing with a highly uncertain environment. We have high performing people that we work with who have reached their edge. And so
Mm.
that building of resilience, how do you create space, continues to be a challenge. And then the final piece is the industry is in the industry, all of the industries, everyone that I work in. So I've worked in energy, in tech, in pharma.
Hmm.
Each one of those have faced huge levels of change and modification in the last 5 years. So in my coaching conversations, I'm also noticing that there's a real need to get to explore advice, which is not often something that we don't do too much advising usually in coaching, but more and more I'm noticing that, Sarah, how do I think about this? Can you give me a framework to think about this challenge?
Hmm.
And I believe that that's a different kind of connection that coaches are creating in the current environment.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were talking there, I was thinking back to a previous episode again. There's another shameless plug, but we spoke to Timon de Jong, who talked about the polycrisis that we find ourselves in, which was a term I'd not become familiar with. And of course, that is essentially the amalgamation of all the crises that are currently going on in our world. And it is constant, where we have, crisis after crisis, things that go on for longer periods of time and so on. And so there's always something. Whenever you open up any news app, there's always stuff that is
Mhm.
going on in the world that requires some form of brain power in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, there's going to be a lot on, and if that's just potentially just aside from the day-to-day jobs that people are doing, um, which is
And
going
that's
to add
the
its
big
own level of
thing.
stress.
The polycrisis has brought in the polycrisis is brought in, it's in every dimension of life. And
Mm,
not only are leaders dealing with that for themselves, more importantly, the leaders I'm coaching are seeing that in their teams.
sure.
And so to have the capacity to not only look after oneself, but also the people who are around them is the distinctive challenge that is almost unique to our time, because everywhere
Mm,
we look, our roles are changing, our professional, our personal roles are changing, and we're facing
mm.
crisis.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm going to ask an extra question before I move on to my next one, because I think it potentially is
Please
important.
do.
And that's let's because I want to hear a bit about a success story. But before I do, I just wanted to ask about how does it work in reality, like in terms of
Mm.
is it who's coming forward to getting coaching help? Is it the client or is it us approaching? Like where does the journey start?
As always, as a great coach, we always say it depends.
Mhm.
For instance, I'm working with a CEO at the moment who approached us and
Mhm.
is moving his startup. from what I call phase 1 into phase 2, and needs to do a skills assessment, a leadership assessment, and figure out, okay, who am I going to be in this context? So
Mhm.
they recognize the needs, they work closely with the board, and I'm working with them for the next 12 months as they figure out, as they move through this phase. Other times we have a whole group of coaches who are available to our clients, and so we might have clients with whom we have an existing relationship, and they may get in touch with us, and then we open the conversation that way. So
Mhm.
there are many ways of doing it. Finally, I might just have encountered somebody. I've been known to have worked with someone 6 years ago, got them through a phase of change. They come back, they're in a new job, new role, new something,
Mhm.
and then want extra coaching. And then how it works is there's always a bit of an agreement session. So if
Mhm.
you want to get into the practicalities, but fundamentally, then when a person comes to us who wants to be coached, or when a client approaches us about arranging coaching, the first thing we do is, in coaching words, we use it a contract, or we come to
Mhm.
an agreement about how many times we meet, what outcomes we're looking at, what's evidence of return on investment, if that's important. All of those things happen up front, because coaching really is a good structured conversation.
Mm. And therefore, I was curious because hearing that, I would imagine there's a certain level of vulnerability that goes along with these coaching calls that you have, and I would imagine also that in some ways it can be, I guess, like a relationship a person might have with a therapist in some ways. Would that be fair to say or not?
Certainly, the vulnerability piece is really always surprises me as a coach. And
Mm.
by that, I mean very quickly, I have a chance to have a one-to-one conversation with someone who barely knows me, who I
Mm.
barely know, and we are looking at their decision making, we're looking at next steps, we're looking at legacy, we're looking at
Mm.
real core values within 2 or 3 hours. And
Yeah.
so one of the questions I usually ask when I start working with someone is, what do you need to know about me in order for
Yeah.
us to work together? And that's why that 60 seconds was so quick at the beginning, because some people want to know different things.
Of
And
course.
so
Yeah.
it's really important when I'm agreeing with somebody, well, what do you want, what do you want to know? And we can be
Mm.
playful with it. So that's definitely a humbling experience. And I do feel really lucky that I
Yeah.
get to
Rewarding.
hold
Yeah.
that space with clients for a little while. And it's not therapy. Uh,
Sure.
And by that, I mean, certainly there are behaviors and psychology. My background is steeped in psychological training and how groups work and how teams work, as well as how people work. Uh, the therapeutic sense is if I sense that there needs to be a deeper conversation about something that I'm not trained for, I have a good group of people that I can refer on, our
Yeah.
coaches. But by default, the people we coach, we believe are ready to be coached, which means that
Yeah.
they're ready for a bit of a challenge. They're ready to have a good conversation about the future.
That's really well put. Yeah, thank you for that, and I hope that possibly even clarifies it for other people as well. Um, Ace, let's move on to our next question then. So, I was hoping that you'd be able to share. Now, obviously, you might not be able to name any names, but a bit of a success story where executive coaching has led to a significant transformation within an organization.
Well, this one, you shared this question with me earlier, and I've been thinking about it. And there are a couple things I've been thinking about. One is, usually a coach is one of many things that a leader is using to transform an organization.
Mhm.
So that's how I approach my work. So most of the transformation activity, I might nudge people along, and I am part of a whole raft of tools and people who this leader uses in order to transform. So I have a really hard time saying that it's a success story for me. One of the stories I was happy to talk about was I worked with a software consultancy a few years ago, And I actually worked with their executive team, and they were getting ready for an IPO. And there was some conflict between key people in the team. So this was a team coaching arrangement, but it needed to be two things. So one was there was a couple people who were not getting along, who were holding the team back from the work they needed to do. So I coached each one of them individually, and then switched into mediating a bit of the conflict, and then worked with the whole team to talk about how they align with each other, what their purpose was as they move forward towards the IPO. And we worked together for about 6 or 8 months, and and the interesting thing, and this is why I'm humble before the success, is it wasn't that conflict wasn't completely resolved, because it wasn't. But the CEO did take me aside, and he said, "This bit of work that you've done has held this team enough so that we can prepare for what's next." And sometimes that's and for him to be very clear about, this is how coaching has worked for us. It's held this space, made us look at some difficult things as we move towards the next piece of our organizational journey. That's enough. So that whether that's a success, but for me, that's very much about, I can be there to coach you, hold you as you make difficult decisions. And as it was, one person left the business moved forward, and the business had a successful listing and has exponential. I think they had 20% growth year on year. So I was part of that. Yes. Was I responsible for that transformation?
Well, I would challenge that thinking, and only on the basis that if they've made the effort to pull you aside and say, we can attribute certain changes to the work that you have done, then I would say that's absolutely related to the coaching work that you've done. And I would imagine that that's in a way a bit of a tricky thing about coaching, is because as far as I understand it, it can be as much about trying to help say an individual to figure out the problems themselves and how to deal with those, but it's in providing that way of enabling that thinking. So you as the coach wouldn't necessarily be responsible for going, oh, I helped them figure out that, they figured out that problem because of something I said, because I had the answer. But it's not about that, is it? As far as I understand, is that right?
There are two things that I think a good coach does well. And one is, we hold hope. So some people come and are aiming, they're clear about their goal. They're not sure how they're going to get there. And we hold the hope that will happen. So you're absolutely right. So that's certainly one of the reasons why people come to us. And the other thing too, though, often, and this is often with leaders often know what they need to do. They just need someone to think about it with before they do it.
Yeah.
So more often than not, it is a decision that needs to be made that is challenging for that leader, and they want some space to think about it.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it. So with Impact, one of our key approaches to the way we do all of our learning with clients is experiential learning. So we're an experiential learning organization at the core. How does that approach complement coaching?
Perfectly. That's another reason why I'm here. And by that I mean, the really, really successful leadership coaching, executive coaching happens with a period of time between. And when I was doing my coaching training years ago, one of my supervisors, she said to me, she's like, you got to give them some space to do stuff. And so what coaching does is I enter into an agreement with you about a goal you might have, or somewhere that you want to be, or something you want to explore. So we have a good, structured, challenging conversation, if that's what you're up for. And then from that conversation, there are a few things you're going to try out, you're going to experiment with. And that's experience. So it completely falls into that. I'm going to go away, experience some stuff, Sarah, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to unpack that. or you might have already unpacked it yourself and you've got that capacity. And then you come in and say, so what's next? And then you go
Mm.
and so that the coaching creates momentum towards that goal. And so and that goal and that momentum is experience.
Mm.
Now that's a kind of a classic relationship that we're talking about. Another thing though that we do a lot of is we do a lot of walking and talking. So
Right.
and that too then, so you can do that in a couple of ways. I know so this is a shameless plug from our side. Um, I know we have executive retreats here in the UK where
Hmm.
we have executives come up, leaders come up for about 36 hours and hang out with us in the lakes. And part of that is walking and talking.
Mm.
So as you walk with someone, you begin to have a full body experience. Your brains begin to work the same. You walk usually in the same cadence, all of those things. So if I'm coaching you and we're having a good structured conversation, already we're in sync and I can feel when I've touched a nerve. So coaches use their whole selves to understand that and be fully immersed in that experience.
Mm.
That's an example. And the final piece is and we also do that remotely. So what I'm describing with you, I was working with a leader 2 years ago, and it was fascinating. I actually stayed still, and she chose to walk around the streets of London, obviously with safety, but with me in her ear. And she found
Hmm.
that movement facilitated a different kind of creative thinking. So
Mm.
movement comes to mind, but that those experiences that we build here at Impact are based on movement, based on trying
Mm.
something different. And
It's
without
so
those
funny, isn't it? People
experiences,
forget. People forget that, and me included. That of course, the brain is as affected by blood flow as any other part of the body. So if you if you get up and move around, then you're going to be pumping blood around the body, including to the brain, which,
yes.
sure enough, is going to is going to enhance thinking, isn't it? So,
And this is the cool bit. The cool bit, not only that, is when you do repetitive work, when you do repetitive motion, like walking,
mm,
your brain, there are different pathways are connected that are not always connected if you're sitting still. So
mm.
all that we can geek out on this, Dan. We totally could, but there's all this really interesting research, which psychologically we know is always there because
Yeah.
in Oxford we have circular paths, which are called philosophers' walks, and they are
Okay.
that way because they facilitate thinking. So
Mm.
it's the same thing in coaching. If we can facilitate a new way of thinking by creating an experience where we can walk together.
Yeah. Maybe I should do all the podcasts walking from now on. That will be logistically interesting. That's for
I'd
sure,
love to do that
especially
one with
with
you.
mics and
Be really
cameras that
good.
we try and yeah. Well, it's yeah. There's been loads to pick up on there, and I feel like we're going to open another can of worms now by introducing the technology question, which so we've and of course AI being a hot topic at the moment. In fact,
Mm,
we've mentioned it on so many of our podcast episodes recently. And as we've already talked about, there is a deeply human
mm,
connection with when it comes to coaching, uh, and that's even through remote and utilizing technology that way. There are ways of still making it deeply human. But so where do you see the role of AI in the future for coaching? Do you think that people will turn to AI for a sort of a coaching help, or do you think that people would maybe try it and then realize that it's not necessarily right? What do you think?
well, they already are. So
Sure.
there certainly are, and there's some good research. Well, it's young, a couple years, but out of Henley Business School here in the UK, there's a bit of research about how AI is shifting coaching, and I think ChatGPT, the latest version has come out, and one of the things, and literally today, or at least I heard it on the radio today, one of the key bits that they're noticing is that kind of counseling advising response that might be coming out through AI. This is where then the counseling and the therapeutic environment and the coaching research is beginning to get intertwined because there's really good evidence that having a chatbot at a key point where someone needs to have a response can be really useful. So
Mm,
I'm approaching AI as a both and, because it's been here for 15 years. It's just, or longer, probably those in who, but I certainly was in meetings with clients where they were talking about machine learning and AI 15 years ago. So
mm,
it's around, it's not going away. So it's about us as coaches figuring out how then do we build AI into our work. It might be around agreeing contract. It might be around how we create interactive responses that allow our clients to have specific conversations when we're not there, and whether or not that's useful. All that I know is that it's here, and we need to be able to use it just like any
mm,
other tool in our
mm,
work. And it certainly can be. I do not want to discount how useful it can be for someone who needs a response in a certain way.
mm.
Again, then it's on to us about where the data backing up the AI is coming from,
Yeah.
and also what other support structures are there, what other support structures are there in order to when they, because chatbots, that's they're more than chatbots, but they can only get you so far. Because someone
Yeah, I
recently,
think this.
yeah, sorry, sorry.
No, 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 you're good. I'm going to kind of bring back something we said right at the beginning, which was I think is kind of really crucial here, and that's that relentlessly curious descriptor that you used earlier on, which I think lends itself really well to AI, because I think that that there's there's no reason why we can't ask an AI bot a question and challenge the answer, with and
Mm,
get a second opinion. Because I think that I think we should do that in some cases. I think like we as you've said, AI has been around for a long time, as has the internet, as we all know. It's just the speed at which it's changing, and it is changing rapidly. But I think with that comes that need to find out more about it, and also find out what its limitations are at the minute, but also not necessarily relying on it if it doesn't feel right in the gut. So that whole noticing what's going on, might you don't want to just take something for granted, right? um, and I've often found that sometimes it doesn't always have all the answers that are correct. It does need a bit of human interaction and human correction in some ways, to just take it over the line. But so I think, yeah, that's really interesting. So there's no deep concern that you've got that AI is going to replace coaches anytime soon.
I think there are bits of my work which might be replaced, and I believe that that's part of the change that I'm managing or we're managing in the coaching community. That
Mm,
there is bits of that. One of the things, as you were talking through about being relentlessly curious and the human centered, the thing that AI doesn't have yet, and it might do, is how to deal with difference. So
mm,
that goes back to the data that's backing up the artificial intelligence. And so one of the key things that coaches can do and are trained to do and are relentless with is uh, our ability to try to work with anyone, and that across culture in particular. So that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges of AI at the moment, is that it's based in the internet, which is still predominantly influenced by the people who created it 20 or 30 years ago, and that's very
yeah.
different than a lot of the people who are using it. So the human-centered approach that coaching brings, the human to human, tolerates difference and can create really wonderful conversations and transformation, because we know coaches know how to work with people who might be different or who might be
Mm,
in a different kind of place. And that's where the getting it wrong comes in.
yeah. And it'll be interesting to see generationally how different it'll be
Yeah.
for the younger generation that are coming into the leadership roles that they'll find themselves in inevitably in however many years' time, and how different it'll be then. It's going to be an interesting space to watch and observe.
I happen to be the mother of two teenagers, older teenagers, and yeah, the one-to-one, the human conversation seems to still be a need. So it'll be, yeah, I agree
That's
with you. Those leaders, it will be interesting to see how they use AI. And also, I'm also continually surprised how the human conversation, the exploratory conversations that coaching brings are young people that I know. I feel so old as I say that. But anyway, young people that I know are still into it. They still want to have those types of conversation.
Yeah, and it's super important, I think, that is a whole other topic which we could get into, but we won't. We'll, but Sarah, it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you today. I have one final question for you as we bring this to a close, which is the same. Again, we have another question which we ask all our guests, which is, if you were to start your career again, knowing what you know now, what would be the best piece of advice you would give yourself?
The phrase that comes to mind right here and now is "hang in there." Yeah, and
That's really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Hang in there, because you have no idea what's next. I'm getting all excited about that one, but you just don't. It's cool.
It is, and it's one that you, I presume, you still sort of adhere to. Do you live by that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very similar to that, and I've heard this quite a lot as well, that this too shall pass. It kind of lends itself hand in hand to go with that, hang in there and see what comes. Yeah, the journey is the biggest part of it. Yeah. Well, Sarah, thank you very much for giving us your time today. We super appreciate it. So that's it's been a wonderful conversation, and loads to expand on, but sadly we just don't have time. But thank you again for giving us your time today. And that will just leave me to say that if you'd like to find out anything more about Impact and the coaching work that we do, then you can find that link plus the links to Sarah's and I's LinkedIn profiles. They'll be in the description. And of course, if you haven't yet, then go back and look at our back catalogue of podcasts. We've got them on YouTube and Spotify. So all the links that you need to find those will be in that description box. So that just leaves me to thank Sarah once again for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
And until the next time, take care.